Dropped him back.
That song is free on artlist.io. That's not an ad for them, but I do love their free music. Welcome back to Blitz Boys. It's time for another episode. You have to excuse us. We're a little tired. It's been a long day, but we're here to give you our Big 12 preview. We thought we'd be covering more of the Iowa State betting scandal that came out. The only other thing that I've really seen since last week is the Iowa backup kicker placed an under bet, and I brought it up last week because it came out right as we wrapped up recording, and I
Yeah,
talked about it.
he bet the under, and
Yeah,
everyone was confused as to why that was against the law because
yeah,
anyone that bet the under won money the entire season.
exactly.
It didn't
Uh,
take an inside man on the team to win that bet.
Absolutely. But instead, what we got was absolute chaos across the entire college football landscape. There was rumors of schools leaving the Pac-12, mainly Oregon and Washington. You
Mhm.
and I were talking about it as you are a Penn State fan of the Big Ten. I love Oregon. Hey, it'd be cool, if our teams ended up in the same conference. Everybody for the past week and a half before this all went down was tweeting eye emojis and spreading rumors about and stuff. And all of a sudden, the floodgates came open. Um, I believe it came out Wednesday night after we were done, and it said,
Mhm.
Oregon and Washington going to the Big Ten is all but a done deal. They just need to pass the vote. And then Thursday was more the same. Yep, okay, everything's getting finalized. Arizona State, and Utah are leaving for the Big 12. Arizona was the first school to kind of get the vote. I believe they were even voted in Thursday night. They got their
Yeah,
vote passed the Big 12
unanimous.
chancellors
Yeah.
and presidents. And then all of a sudden it comes out Friday morning. Conversations have cooled. There's going to be a meeting for all the Pac-12 presidents, and that they're going to try and hash this out and solidify the conference going forward and sign this media deal. And it's okay, well, maybe it is going to calm down. Turns out what they were trying to do in that meeting was force everybody to sign the grant of rights, and I'm gonna explain that in a minute because I kinda had it mixed up before. I've had it fully explained to me now, so we're gonna talk about it here in a minute. Um, Oregon and Washington figured out what that meeting was, and they no-showed that meeting. They also kind of pushed out that rumor that talks had cooled between them and the Big Ten, mainly to try and get the Big Ten to offer more travel money. That was the only thing holding up the deal.
And I'd like to interject on that because the
Mhm.
funniest thing that I had heard throughout this is, it kind of jumped at one point that maybe those two teams go to the Big 12 instead. Maybe they're the
Yep.
ones that
Mhm.
jump. Um, and the entire time, the Big Ten themselves just kept releasing that they are no way going after any teams at this point. They're set.
Yeah.
If some sort of opportunity comes up in the next couple of days, they'll definitely look at it. They'll definitely vote upon it.
Right.
But they're not actively looking for teams. Yet ever since USC and UCLA had signed to come over, there's been these talks that the Big Ten is trying to get Oregon and Washington to also come. So it's also to me kind of weird because I wonder which side is correct.
Well,
Like, or
and
is it a happy medium where like both sides are kind of, we're not really looking for anything, but also if we're going to take two teams, these are going to be the two teams.
right. Yeah, I think it's more of the happy medium, and I don't think the Big Ten was reaching out saying, "Hey,
Mhm.
you guys wanna come over here?" I think it was more so Oregon and Washington they were waiting. They were patient. They wanted to see what this new media deal, the Pac-12 kept putting off. What is that gonna be? And then it came out that it's gonna be an Apple TV deal, and then it's gonna be, behind a paywall, and then you get bonuses based on how many, subscribers for, each school kind of brings in
The
and all this other
messy deal,
stuff.
basically.
Right. The money wasn't terrible, but as compared to what the Big Ten and, the SEC
SEC.
and nobody's gonna get that money, and, but they were at, I actually have the numbers here. Their previous contract was, $21 million. So this was gonna be $23 million guaranteed, like I said, with those incentives. So not a huge pay bump while you have schools that are in the Big
Half.
Ten.
Half of
Right,
that. Yeah.
exactly. Um, so they were waiting, and I think once that the media deal finally broke, Oregon, Washington, they're like, no, we're out of here. Like we're not signing this. We're
Mm.
already behind the 8 ball. I'm not falling farther behind the 8 ball, and I think that's when they reached out to the Big Tens. Would you guys be interested? And like you said, there was also talks of them. I think them talking to the Big 12 was more so to be like, if the Big Ten wants to add us, it's now or never.
Let's hurry this up.
Right? Either you offer us, or hey, we will go to the
Yeah.
Big 12 because of the Big 12. And again, I'll talk about it here in a minute. As a really
Sleeper conference that has just freaking risen up.
yeah. Um, so I'm going to go down and kind of break down the Pac-12 media deals and everybody's media deal as of right now. Um, so the Apple deal was finally offered on August 1st, presented to all the schools. It was a 5-year deal, $23 million a school, incentives based on subscribers. The American Conference gets $7 million a school. ACC is 17 million. The Big Ten is 31.4 right now. Starting next year, it's $60 million, and that might actually be flipped. It might be $60 million starting this year. I did not date check the article. The Big 12 is 20 million this year. It will be $31.6 million next year. Conference USA gets $450,000 a school. The MAC gets 600,000. Mountain West gets 4 million. Pac-12, as I said, gets 21. SEC gets $40 million, and all these are just through the media deals. This isn't the added bonuses for college football playoffs or any of that stuff. This is strictly just the bare bones media deal. SEC is $40 million. That's their new contract. Sunbelt is 500,000 a team. Notre Dame gets $26 million, and they are looking. I think their contract is up after next season, or yes, after next season. And they're looking, hopefully, to get $75 million. I don't think they get that unless they join a conference. So with Oregon and Washington moving to the Big Ten, they're going to start at $30 million a year, and every year from there, they're going to get another $1 million until the year 2030, in which they'll become fully integrated and Big Ten members, and they'll get that full contract. Big 12,
Which is still starting out to switch conferences, $7 million more than they were just
exactly.
going to be offered at that meeting.
Absolutely. The schools that are going to join the Big 12 is going to they're going to get the full $31.7 million. And so looking at this, so anyway, after Oregon, Washington announced that they are going to join the Big Ten, the Wisconsin, or excuse me, not the Wisconsin, the Arizona chancellors, presidents ratified their move to the Big 12. And then not too much later, I think it was later the same day, they extended the offer to Arizona State and Utah. They took that up in a heartbeat. So there are 4 schools left as of right now, as of recording, in the Pac-12. The Pac-4, it is Stanford, Cal, Washington State, and Oregon State. Before I get your thoughts on kind of all that happened, I just want to say I feel absolutely horrible for Washington State and Oregon State. Their programs are criminally undervalued. I think they bring a lot, not just to the college football as a whole, but to the Pac-12. The fact that those are the 2 schools that nobody has mentioned a word about of trying to add to another conference or anything like that. The Big 12 has come out and announced that they're done. They are not pursuing any more schools. They are shutting it down.
They'd have to divvy more money up to teams if they keep,
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
they
Yeah,
keep adding
they've
teams,
hit their edge. Yeah.
especially because they're not doing what the Big Ten is doing in starting the new teams at a lower rate. Like you had said, the
Right.
new teams are starting out at that 31 million right away.
Yeah, and the Big 12 was really smart when they signed their deal with ESPN and Fox. I think it's with Fox too, or it might just be ESPN. Um, but when they signed it, they got a prorated amount to come in, so that way if they added, I think the maximum was 4 teams. If they added 4 teams, um, they would have enough money from that contract to add in to pay these schools. Whereas the Big Ten kind of had to be like, okay, listen, we're not going to pay you the full 60 million, but we can pay you X amount, about half to start. We'll add another million every year. Um, of course, the other school, and this started weeks ago, Colorado left to join the Big 12 as well.
Which real quick,
Mhm.
Colorado has got to be one of the smartest schools in terms of these whole money deals when it comes to this, because they left the Big 12 to go to the Pac-12 when the Pac-12 got the bigger contract than the Big 12 had years ago.
Mhm.
Now they're flipping back to the Big 12 as soon as they can get in with the big contract.
Yeah. And I mean, money wise, like you said, I 100% agree with you. They're pretty smart. They should have never left the Big 12 in my eyes. I mean, years ago
Correct.
when they left, what was that, 2013, 2014, when
Yes.
we had that first huge shift in conference realignment. Everybody thought the Pac-12 was going to, end up like or excuse me, everybody thought the Big 12 was going to end up like the Pac-12 is now.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was going to leave, everybody was going to die. The Pac-12 or Pac-10 at the time was supposed to become the Pac-16. It was supposed to add it was Texas, Oklahoma State, um, Oklahoma, I think Texas A&M, Colorado, and I believe Nebraska. I think those were the 6 schools, or it might have been another school other than Nebraska. We're supposed to go join the Pac-12, and that was going to be a huge blow to the Big 12, and they were either going to have to combine with somebody else, or they were going to die. And now here we are, and even last year we're talking about rumors is the Big 12 in trouble? Texas and Oklahoma are leaving; those are the corner post
Mm-hmm.
of this conference, and here that they're leaving, and yeah, they added 4 more schools, but really, how good are they? And now all of a sudden here they are, they're picking up the scraps off of the Pac-12's plate, and I think I'm not going to say the Big 12 is going to be the best conference in college football. This is going to be one of the most entertaining conferences, though. They have a lot of natural rivalries that are back. Utah and BYU is at the top of that list. Kansas, Kansas State. Uh, you have the 4 corners covered with Utah, Arizona. Um, I can't think of the other schools or states that make up the 4 corners, but they have a vast geography. You got West Virginia and Cincinnati now, which I think is going to be a national
Mm-hmm.
rivalry. The Big 12 looks like one of the most healthiest conferences right now, and like I said, it's going to be so much fun to watch this conference play out next season. But like I said, I just wanted to just Wisconsin, or I keep saying Wisconsin, Washington State and Oregon State deserve so much better than what they're getting right now. Like I said, as an
I
or
I I think that I have a good plan for them, which we'll talk about later when we think about what the Pac-12 should do from here.
yeah,
That involves both of them. That I hope, like you, looking at the 4 teams left. I mean, Stanford realistically could try and do like a unattached Notre Dame style type deal. Cal U is just kind of Cal U. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, Jared Goff are the only 2 people I know of that have ever come out of that school.
Jared Goff did
Jared
great
Goff.
now.
Now, where did he go?
He went to USC, right?
USC. No, no, I think he went to Cal U.
He did. You're right. You're right.
I think. But anyway, either way, Aaron Rodgers
I was thinking of
and maybe
Darnold.
him.
Darnold's the one I was thinking of. He
Oh
went to
yeah, yeah.
USC. Golf.
But
Golf did go to.
but either way, I mean, those 2 guys are the only 2 people that I know to come out of that school recently, and so like they just haven't had a lot of great, at least from a football perspective, teams recently.
Yeah, he did go to Cal. The only other notable name I remember is Marshawn Lynch. Um, but yeah,
Skinny
uh,
man.
yeah. So I talked about this briefly. So just to explain what grant of rights actually is, because we were talking about the ACC and we were so worried about the ACC, and it seemed like they were in a race with the Pac-12 to see who could collapse first when we discussed this last week. So grant of rights, even if a team is able to pay the exit fee, the Big 12 started this. The Big 12 is the first team to implement a grant of rights, um, and then so that lasts the length of the TV contract deal. So even if a team manages to pay whatever the exit fee is to leave the conference, um, due to grant of rights, whatever money they make TV wise, um, in their new conference, they still have to pay to their old conference. And there are estimates with Florida State looking to leave and Clemson and all these. The reason they're trying to get the grant of rights broken up is because it could cost teams close to $500 million to leave and go to a conference like the SEC due to just how long the ACC contract is. It runs till 2036.
2036. Yeah.
Yeah. And also speaking of the ACC, last week I said the exit fee was 52 million. It's actually 120 million. I had the wrong figure on that, so I just wanted to
Yeah, I
issue
mean,
it.
so just real quick, if the SEC were to sign that $75 million a year uh TV rights deal, that each team would get, that you were saying that their hopes is getting. I mean, right there in the first year of exiting and getting that is $200 million that they end up sending right back to the ACC just to try
Right.
and get out if you're Florida State or Clemson or whoever.
Yeah. And that's I think so understanding what that means now and what all that entails. if unless somehow these schools figure out a legal way to break up that grant of right contract, um, the ACC will be fine for years. Even if Clemson and Florida State do end up leaving, I think the only way you could really get around that is if you become an independent school.
Did you
Eh,
see what Florida State is looking at?
yeah,
They're looking at some overseas money to help
they are.
out.
Yeah, they brought in, yeah, no, the memes that had that is what I thought was gonna be the big story last week,
Yeah.
and watching the memes come out about that, and then all of a sudden, the realignment news breaks.
Yep.
Um,
Real quick.
yeah. Um, but before I carry on, I just wanna get your initial thoughts on everything that happened with realignment next week or last week, excuse me, and just kinda has how that has you looking at the landscape of college football and your feelings towards it.
I think in terms of college football, it's going to be great. I mean, we have three mega conferences right now in the Big 12, the Pac, or I sorry, the Big 12, the Big 10, and the SEC.
Mhm.
I just think in terms of in 2 3 years, once you get Texas and Oklahoma over to the SEC, you still have a very packed Big 12. At that point, it'll be what 16 teams. So
Yeah, yeah.
um, you have the Big 10, which will have 18 teams, barring no other additions. Everyone keeps saying they need to add two more teams and do uh, two 10-team conferences. Just basically go back to to what they had at one point. But with two conferences. But I think that the ACC is going to kind of have a little bit of some downtime. I think for compared to what they recently have had, with Clemson kind of bringing the ACC to the forefront with their college football playoff, their ability to get there so many years and stuff. I think that they're going to kind of run a couple of years here, similar to what the Pac-12 has in the last couple of years, where every once in a while they get a team in, like they did with Oregon,
Mhm,
into the conference playoffs or to the college football playoffs. But I think that they're just going to kind of look down compared to these three mega conferences in terms of these deals happening. And I mean, they haven't talked really enough about all the other people that this has affected.
mhm.
Uh, there's now like they're saying like you're going to have someone in Oregon that is maybe a track and field athlete that is going to have to fly cross country to New Jersey to have a meet at Rutgers, and then they're going to fly back, get home at 4 a.m. and have to go to class that day because they're not a football player. They don't get a free pass to miss class the next day. It's
Mhm.
it's much different regulations and stuff. So I just think that in terms of football, it's going to be amazing. I think that we're going to get to see, like you had said, there's a lot of rivalries that are kind of getting back together. A lot of different things we're going to get to see. Uh, but in terms of them not thinking about every other student athlete, it
Right.
does kind of suck in that aspect.
Yeah. Um, so my thoughts on it is as an Oregon fan and being friends with Penn State fans
Mhm.
and you guys and I have family that are Penn State fans, I have family that are Michigan fans. Um, my father-in-law's a Nebraska alum and a huge Nebraska fan. I am super excited for that aspect. I kind of wish the NCAA would almost just go into sport only conferences. Like the big football conferences can do whatever they want and it won't affect, the basketball conferences and stuff like that. Because
Sort of
like you
similar to like Notre Dame, how their football is independent, but the rest of them are ACC.
right. Kind
Okay.
of like that. But I mean, just like I think even FCS schools kind of do it that way. Because a lot of the FCS schools are, there's no D1 AA in
Hmm.
basketball. It's D1, and so conferences are different there as well. But just in that aspect, because like you said, I nobody thought about any of the other sports, and I do get the frustration from like I've seen a lot of softball players and other sports speaking out who are like, you know our family can't come see our games now, and there's a certain aspect of being a college athlete. Like I left Pennsylvania, I went to Vermont to play school, and I get that I made that choice, but not everybody chooses to go so far away to school, and they wanted to stay somewhat close to home. Granted, Oregon was still traveling to Southern California. I don't think families were making that trip, every time, but I do get their concern, and like you said, I feel like they were left behind. Um, but as a fan of a now Big Ten school to get to compete against you guys, I'm excited. But I don't like that this is what college football has become. It's and it's just the way the world works, and I get that now, especially becoming an adult. But everything's just driven by money. I kind of when we were kids, and maybe I don't want to say it was this way, but I think it was more so just because of how young we were growing up. College football was so different from the pros because it didn't matter about money. It was about rivalries and just playing your hardest so you could get to go to the NFL to go make all this money. And not even talking about NIL stuff and all that, but just watching, these TV executives, these guys that sit in suits and offices all day, just sit there and kind of dictate the entire college football landscape like this. It is a little disheartening to see. Going over those TV contracts, not saying the SEC and the Big Ten don't deserve so much more money than what the MAC and stuff get. Um, and there is something little rant I'm going to go on here in a little bit, and we'll get to it in a minute. But it's disheartening to see on the other side too. So I get everybody else's frustration, and again, going back to Oregon State and Washington State, seeing being a fan of a Pac-12 school currently, you get to follow a lot of that chain of other fan bases and stuff, seeing how upset they are that they were just kind of completely left behind and forgotten. Because at first, when it came out that Oregon and Washington were talking, they were like, "Well, we want to take these guys with us," and I completely get the school's frustration, that they essentially feel abandoned. And again, they are criminally underrated as programs to just be left behind like this. Oregon State, it was a really good. They beat a top 10 Oregon team last year. They stomped Florida in their bowl game. They finished inside the top 25.
Yep.
Washington State started off really hot and they kind of had an up and down season from there. But again, really solid programs, and they just got tossed by the wayside. You look at Stanford more so than Cal, but Stanford has the most NCAA championships in every other sport outside of football. They have one of the best golf programs. They win. I think it's called It's not the President's Cup. Maybe it is, but the overall, like just the best school across the board, just about every year. Um, and I understand the ACC is talking to them at Cal now, but just kind of disrespect to a lot of the schools that I don't think deserve it. Um, so before we move on, what do you see happening? What is your forecast for where we go from here? What happens to those last four schools? Do you think? And just where do you see the dust settling? On everything.
Yeah, so I don't think that there's going to be any team moves the rest of this season. I think that we are kind of done with that as of right now. I think that, like you said, I think that might have been one of the reasons why Oregon and um,
Washington.
Washington, why they didn't sign a lot sooner with the Big Ten is because I think that, like you said, I think that there was negotiations trying to get their in-state rivals to come along with. But I think that once it got down to like, if you want to come, it's you or nobody.
Right.
They were like, you know what? All right, we got to sign. I think that the Pac-12 um, should align with Mountain West. I think from a geographical standpoint, it makes sense. It's cost effective. They're not going to get a huge contract to be able to afford to come across the country to play ACC teams and stuff like that if
Right.
there is their plan. The ACC is locked into such a ironclad contract that even if they do come over to the ACC, they're probably going to be looking at half of what the ACC is currently getting if they do kind of similar to what the Big Ten did. Which I
Mhm.
mean, at that point, would you say they're getting 17 million right now, team? I think. Um,
ACC, yeah, 17 million.
yeah, so I mean, at that point, you're looking at 8.5 million compared to the 21 that they were getting prior to this Apple deal and the big shakeup. I just think the Mountain West seems the most reasonable for those teams right now. I think Washington State and Oregon State could go in there and really hang with Air Force and some of the other bigger teams there, and kind of try and make that conference like theirs.
Mhm.
Um, I think that the ACC, I think that these teams, the Magnificent Seven that they're calling them, I think that these teams are going to take this like to court. They're going to try and do what they can, and I think what's going to end up happening is they're going to develop a distribution thing where whichever teams are bringing in the most eyes, they're now going to distribute the money differently, which
Yeah.
is going to help Florida State and Clemson and whoever else is doing good those years. But teams like Duke and Wake Forest, or not Duke, sorry, Boston College and Wake Forest, they're about to see no money basically
Mhm.
if that happens, because for them to be able to pay Clemson and Florida State or whoever else is getting the most eyes on the ACC, it's they're going to have to take a lot of money from those smaller schools.
Yeah. I'll talk about the ACC quick before I move back to what I think happens with those last four schools. First of all, I think it's absolutely stupid that they're trying to add and I don't mean necessarily random
Mm-hmm.
that they're nobody's schools in Stanford and Cal, but the fact that those are the two schools that they're trying to add and bring over just makes no sense. It makes less sense than when the Big Ten added USC and UCLA. That's just a stupid far distance for these schools to be traveling for no reason other than you just want to.
Yeah.
Um, and again, like you said, that I don't think the schools within the ACC will even pass that vote because
Mm-hmm.
again, they're already fighting over the money that they get now. Um, as far as the Magnificent Seven as they're called, Florida State seems to be the only school that's really pushing to get out. I think talks have kind of cooled ever since those 7 schools realized, "I don't think we're gonna get another school to join us to dissolve this conference and, get a new TV deal on our own and all this other stuff." If the opportunity comes up, if Florida State figures out how to get out of this contract, I think they'll leave then, but it doesn't look like they're constantly pushing and pursuing it to the extent that Florida State is. Florida State's AD and presidents are coming out all the time saying, "We hate it here, we don't wanna be in this conference anymore." UNC's, president actually came out last week and said, we get that you're unhappy. Like not a lot of people here are happy. But you don't need. I think you called it barking. Like, you don't need to be barking like this and just sort of like we're in this. Like it sucks, but we got to make the best of it until you can figure out. But there's no need for you to kind of go on these tirades like they've been doing. Um, so that's been kind of interesting to see. As far as the Pac-4 schools, uh, Stanford and Cal have both completely come out and said that they want nothing to do with the Mountain West. I honestly think, and we kind of talked about it briefly. I think their best choice is to go independent, and I think that'll be the best for them going forward until they can, something happens in the college football world where they find an opening. If they go to the ACC, fine, great. They're going to be near the bottom every year. I don't That doesn't help them in recruiting any in my eyes. And again, this is from a strictly football standpoint. They're not really good with all due respect in any major sports. Baseball, I feel like they I don't watch enough college baseball for me to confidently say that they're good or not.
Stanford and
Um,
Washington State are pretty good at baseball, and
yeah,
so if you think that Stanford and Cal U their best options, not wanting to go to the Mountain West at all, they're
yeah,
voicing that is their last chance, their last resort.
yeah.
Um, do you think that it would be smart for Washington State and Oregon State to maybe make that jump? Hey,
I
I know that you guys don't want to make that decision, but look, we're not looking to be just left out here with a 14
Right.
conference. Like, we're
Yeah.
trying to find a home.
I think an ideal situation for Washington State and Oregon State right now is either Stanford and Cal decide, listen, we're just going to go independent, or they do end up joining the ACC. And those are the only two schools left. They get the Pac-12 naming rights and all that stuff kind of tagged onto them. And then from there, they can not join the Mountain West, but also create a merger. Um, you know, I think that'll be the best thing for not just them, but the Mountain West as well. I think that opens more opportunity for that Mountain West conference to get a bigger TV deal,
Mm-hmm.
maybe close to the $20 million number we're seeing, especially with everybody else getting such big money. Um, but a lot of people, and I'm gonna again, this kind of ties into my rant. A lot of people are looking down on the Mountain West. I think the Mountain West is number 2 to the American Conference. If we were to upgrade somebody to a Power Five
Non-power
school,
fives, yeah.
and honestly, with the amount of schools that left, the top schools that left the American this past year, Mountain West might overtake them. Um, and so while I keep trying to dance around it, I'm just going to talk about it. Um, so there's a gentleman on Twitter. I believe he works. I tried reading his bio. He is a huge LSU guy. I believe he covers their practices and stuff. I believe he works for ESPN Radio. Matt Moscana, and I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. So this is what he tweeted last week. This is right after all the big news kind of shook out and we understood what college football is going to look like next year, at least to this point. So I'm going to do a kind of point counterpoint here, just going over his tweets and everything that he brought up. So this is the first tweet he posted on I think this is Friday. What's happening? What is happening today is great for college football. The idea of 133 teams on the same level is and always has been a farce. The days of being force fed garbage cupcake games and a sham of a postseason dictated by old men and ugly blazers will end. Um, so to an extent, I 100% agree with him. Uh, not every college football team is created equally. I absolutely agree with that, and that's a great point. Um, Being force fed the garbage cupcake teams, I don't agree with because I don't feel like anybody has ever force fed, this down our throats. It's the fact that at LSU
What
and
what
Alabama,
UAB team do you think he's talking about in cupcake team? No, I'm kidding.
yeah,
I'm kidding.
no, but I mean that's where I disagree with this is these schools are actively going out and signing these contracts with UAB and and conference USA
Mhm.
schools. And again, I agree, not every team is equal, and I 100% agree with him on that. But I I don't get where he feels that he's force fed to have to sit there and watch LSU play UAB or a school like that because that's the school making that decision. The school wants a tune-up game or,
The
a week
school's
off
paying
before.
for that decision.
Right. The school's taking a week off before they play their biggest rivalry game of the year. And maybe I'm just not understanding what he's trying to say there, but that's in that tweet, that was what was confusing me. From here, he got a lot of Group of 5 fans upset. Um, and again, for the most part, I agree with this tweet. And there was an exchange back and forth. And then he put this tweet out. This was the first tweet I saw, and I was just like, "What the actual hell? Like, why?" First of all, and again, I didn't see the first tweet. I just saw this one, and I was like, "What? Why are you taking a random shot at the Mountain West?
Well,
Like, you're an
for the
LSU fan."
podcast listeners, what's it say?
Yeah. So he says, "I don't care about Mountain West football, and neither does the rest of America." And he went on to elaborate his point from here. I had to read a lot of tweets to kind of understand everything that was happening and what was going on. If I don't think he regrets this at all. I'm not going to try and speak for him. If I was in his shoes, though, I would have changed. I don't care to I don't watch Mountain West football, and neither does the rest of America because what he was getting at, and by the fact that he was saying nobody in America cares about Mountain West football, is the fact that nobody watched the conference championship game last year. Not a lot of people are
Very low ratings. Yeah.
right, and not a lot of people are like me. I love all college football. I think all college football is good college football. It's not great. I get that. Toledo and Ohio facing off is not as amazing as a Tennessee Alabama game. Not every game can be a Tennessee Alabama and Ohio State Michigan. I respect that and I understand that. But as somebody that played Division 3 football, and again, I get that this isn't where he was going with this, and I'm not throwing this at him. Um, but as somebody that fought to get to Division 3 and loved every minute of it, I understand how hard these guys had to prepare and fight just to get to a Division 1 school, even though it's MAC. Like I said, it's not Alabama, it's not Georgia, and I get that. Um, I still just have a respect for them and a love for the game, and that's what these guys have. A lot of these guys understand that they're not going to go pro. Um, but my Christmas is, I believe it's October 4th this year. Starting October 4th, there's going to be 55 consecutive days of college football this year. Or excuse me, not college football, just football. So
Hmm.
Tuesday, you're going to have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. You're going to have MAC, Sun Belt, an ACC game, a Big Ten game thrown in there on Fridays. And then
Wow.
you have college football Saturday, you got your NFL Sunday, and then Monday Night Football and NFL Thursday night too. I can't wait for October 4th. And I might be wrong. I believe that's the date. And again, what he's saying here, I agree. Not every football team, college football team especially, is created equally. I just kind of wish that tweet would have been worded a little bit differently. rather than saying, I and he might not care, and I respect that, and not everybody does. You don't have to love all college football to say you love college football. You can be a diehard SEC fan, and you have the right. If you bleed your school's colors, you have the right to say, I love college football. Um, but to sit there and say, the rest of America doesn't care about it, I felt like was a little bit too far of an exaggeration for me. And again, I'm nitpicking his statement here, but again, he backed it up. He posted viewers here. The SEC championship game last year was the most watched at 10.89 million, whereas the Sun Belt was the least watched at 332,000 viewers. And again, I get that, and to him that might seem like it doesn't care, but in my eyes, I kind of put this on the networks, like outside of the Big Ten and the SEC, like the Power Five conference championship games last year. I hardly saw any advertisement for, hey, Mount West Conference championship game is going to be on, make sure you guys watch it. Like giving the general population advertisement, hey, go watch this. We're putting this product out there. Um, so I kind of put it on the networks. Again, I'm glad I read through the rest of his tweets and I kind of saw the point he was trying to get to. But just just seeing this tweet here,
Yeah,
and
yeah, but
again,
also, I mean, can you go back to that last slide for a second?
yeah, go ahead.
It just shows, all the teams that played in the championship games. I mean, we
Mhm.
had talked about Troy and Coastal Carolina both having big games last season. Jackson State, Ohio, or not Ohio, but we talked about Toledo having a fabulous season. Boise State, we had talked about them multiple times on Saturday morning. So like some of these lower conferences, like they still had big points in the season that we were talking
Mhm.
about them. It's not like everyone only talked about the AAC and up,
Right.
like the Power Five and then the Atlantic, or I mean the American. But yeah, I mean I understand. I think like you said, wrong wordage used
Right.
in those tweets.
And I mean, I know you and Nick kind of roll your eyes at me at times when I'm like, "Hey, we should make the game of the week this week, Eastern Michigan and Western Michigan," and you're like, "No, like that's not." And I get, and like I
It's like,
said,
dude,
yeah,
Ohio State is playing Penn State
yeah,
this
no,
weekend.
and and like I said, I'm not trying. I'm not a college football gatekeeper. I
Mhm.
do feel like my love for this game is I would say on a different level because, like I said, I am excited to sit down on a Tuesday night and watch Ohio and Toledo play in a shitty rainstorm where you're going to see the worst special teams, like 3 punt blocks, and weekday college football and Pac-12 after dark are two of my favorite things. And one of those is going away after this year. Hopefully, the Mountain West does Mountain West after dark because you would have a number one Oregon team travel to a two-win Arizona team and get upset because the game is being played 10 o'clock on the East Coast, and just the wildest shit would always happen in those games.
Mhm.
Um, like I said, it's kind of discouraging to me because there are people out there who absolutely agree with him. We don't care. It's not big time football, and I just need to stress to people that these guys deserve love too. If you're not doing anything on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night or whatever, watch these guys because again, they work their asses off to get to this point. They deserve, bigger. The schools deserve bigger contracts than 500, $700,000 per school, especially like I said with the SEC and the Big Ten are
Mhm.
getting. I'm not saying they deserve that money, and I get that, um, but if I'm just asking you guys out there, give some love to the Group of Five schools this year. Watch those games because they are a lot of fun. It is good football.
You're just giving
Um,
a little homework. Watch one
yeah,
game. Try it
exactly.
out.
Yeah. So that's enough, sentimental stuff on the conference football or college football conference realignment and all that stuff, and I got it out of my system. So let's go ahead. It's we've got a long episode in here already, but it's time to move over to our Big 12 preview for the season. We have a lot to talk about here as well. Slade, my first question to you, looking at the Big 12, what do you think the more interesting storyline is this season? Is it the arrival of the American schools before they came over, or do you think it's how Texas and Oklahoma are going to perform in their final season before they leave to go to the SEC?
I would love to say the American Conference, these teams coming in there.
Mhm.
But I just think that based off of the recruits and the teams that are being put together on this Texas team and the Oklahoma team, I mean, I think it would be unrealistic to think that at the end of the season, these two teams are not in the top four of the Big 12, which to me, it's got to suck for everyone in the Big 12, to if one of these teams wins the Big 12 and just runs away, that's got to suck.
Yeah.
So I think that the big thing this year, I think for all these teams in the Big 12 is just, you want to have a great season, but whatever you got to do, you cannot let Texas or Oregon, or sorry, not Oregon, Oklahoma win the Big 12 this year. You just can't let it happen.
Yeah. I actually went with the American schools
Mhm.
joining just for and I'm not looking down on Texas and Oklahoma. I think they're going to have good seasons, and
You
it's going
will
to be
when you get that tattoo.
yeah, it's going to be fun to watch them. I just think that storyline wise, and
Right.
this is the question I posed is we saw Cincinnati make it to the playoffs a few years ago.
Mhm.
We saw UCF claim a national title, in 2017. Um,
Allegedly, yeah, yeah,
no, that they claimed it. They claimed
yeah,
it. So
yeah,
that's
for sure.
um, so I mean, this is really going to be a case study, and I understand Cincinnati's kind of fall. You could argue they're going to fall off this year. Luke Fickle left.
Mhm.
They're having a lot of turnover there. But how good is the top echelon of Group of Five schools compared to middle of the pack,
Mhm.
uh, Power Five schools? Can these guys come in? Can they hang? Can they finish towards the top, or are they going to be middle of the pack in the Big 12? Can one of them end up in the conference championship game? This, like I said, I think it's just going to be a case study, and I think for that reason, that's why it's going to be more
And there's more teams. So like you're
right,
saying, I mean, it's a week to week storyline. Like, hey,
yeah,
can Cincy upset this team? Whatever.
right. And, especially with the 2 biggest brands in this conference leaving. Now, granted, next year they're gonna add 4 solid schools, but
Mhm.
seeing how well the newcomers from the American are gonna do is gonna speak a lot towards how healthy this conference is gonna be going forward. And I think those are the key things to watch, and that's why I have that as my biggest storyline for the season. Um, the Cinderella story of last year was the Kansas Jayhawks. Out of nowhere, they end up making their first bowl game. That game against Arkansas was, I think, I would argue was the best bowl game we watched all year. They come back, they force it to go to overtime, they narrowly win. But for once, they didn't have 0, 1, or 2 wins. They pull off a 6-win season. Lance Leopold looks like he has that program headed in the right direction. They're unveiling, all these new facility centers they're building there and all this other stuff. Do you think Kansas is here to stay for a couple years? I don't want to say, are they fully back and put
Right.
that jinx on them? Do you think they can compete for a couple years? Can they continue to progress, or do you think we're looking at a one and done season? Are they going to head back towards the basement of the Big 12? 2, 3, maybe 4 wins. How do you see Kansas kind of moving forward from last season?
I think they're gonna have a down year. Looking at their schedule, I think realistically, I could see them losing 8 games. I mean, a 12-game season, that is not good, especially from where they were at this past season. I don't think that they're like, bottom of the barrel. I think that there's these other teams coming in, and that's going to add a lot of. I think it's going to be a learning experience for a lot of for some of those American Conference teams coming in, and so I think that that's going to offer a little cushion for Kansas to kind of get a little breathing room, get a little time to kind of get their feet underneath them after what I suspect is going to happen this season. And I mean, even if they lose, 7 games in a 12-game season, that's not good compared
Yeah.
to what
Um,
what they expect after their
last
last
year was
season.
right. Um, I'm
Are they
I'm
back?
gonna actually disagree with you. I I don't wanna say, like, I don't think it's, like, 2007 levels, like, I'm not expecting them to make the Orange Bowl this year, but I do think, we're gonna see a consistent team out of them. I think they might even improve a little bit o off of last year. I mean, you brought up their schedule, and granted, it is not an easy schedule.
They've got
They
a
have
tough schedule.
I looking at their first 6 games, they have Missouri State, Illinois, Nevada, BYU, Texas, and UCF. Missouri State win. Illinois, I have Illinois winning that one. Um, that not the same week Illinois plays Penn State? I guess not. I mean, it can't be, but Nevada, I have them winning, so they're 2-1 to start the year. BYU, that game's at home, so I'll give that to Kansas just because, and I'll talk more in depth about why I think Kansas is set up for improvement this year. BYU, they win at Texas, they lose, and I think they beat UCF at home. Um,
Really?
I think
So
so.
Texas is where I saw them going on a 5-game losing streak. That's why
I'm going to talk about Oklahoma State here in a minute, but look at it. I think just with what they're bringing back, especially on the offensive side of the ball, you got Jalen Daniels, Devin Neal. That offense is going to be so much improved from last season. Um, I really think uh, I think they make a bowl game this year at the least. If not, they could be looking at. I think if everything goes their way, they're looking at an 8-win season rather than an 8-loss season.
that's
I
definitely great. Yeah.
yeah. Um, but their offense ranked inside the top 50 in every major statistic. That's your scoring, passing, rushing, and total offense. So they were inside the top 50 in all those categories last year. Um, and then, like I said, they returned Devin Neal and Jane Daniels. Their biggest, hang up last year was their defense, who ranked almost last in a lot of those categories. But I think their system is in place now, and these guys are going to have enough confidence behind them that hey, we can go out there, we can. Can't, I don't know if they can beat Texas, but hey, maybe we can hang with them.
Hmm.
Let's go out there, let's hang with some of these bigger schools. Let's pull off a couple wins. We know how good we are. We played TCU, who went to the national championship game. We're not going to talk about what happened there. They went to the national championship game, and we had one of the best games of the season against them. College game day came to our school last year. So I think they have enough experience behind them, but also some confidence behind them now, and I think that's why I think I have them winning 6-7 again. I think ideal scenario they win 8 games. Um, but yeah, let's move on. Who do you have winning? Actually, we're going to do winning last. I already know who you're going to say. I don't even need to ask it. Who do you have as your most improved team for the 2023 season?
Yeah, so just to kind of piggyback off what I had said with the thoughts on Texas and Oklahoma this season before leaving, I think Oklahoma is going to be my most improved. I think that uh, they had 7 losses last season. It was their first season under Venables. 5 of those 7 games, the last drive is when they lost. That's what decided the game. They came out on the wrong side of 5 of those 7 drives. Now you could say you put yourself in that situation, definitely. But I think that first year coach, I think second year with the season is definitely going to be different. It looks like Coach Venables added 17 transfers, 9 of which are on the defense, which defense was horrific for them last year. That was obviously with the drives at the end of the game, they just didn't have the depth for them to be able to have their defense out there on long drives. It's QB Jackson Arnold. He was added to the QB room along with Davis Bevell and one and only General Booty.
Yeah,
These guys are in the QB room, and that doesn't even include Dylan Gabriel, who's coming back from injury. And I mean, he had a pretty good season last year, and Venables kind of trashed him and said like last season was crap and
yeah,
that he needs to do better this season. Last year, he threw for 3,100 yards, 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions with a 62% completion rating. And Venables was like 62% completion rating is horrible.
yeah.
So, I mean, I think that if they're able to just kind of capitalize, they need the defense, like what the 9 of those 17 guys that came with the transfer portal. I think that they could really have a great season. I could see them kind of finishing third or fourth, and I think that's a big change from this past season.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think Oklahoma is going to be vastly improved. The team I picked was Baylor. But real quick, just before I talk about them, we we looked at Oklahoma last year, like their offense was struggling, and it had definitely fallen from the heights of what Lincoln Riley had it at. But the fact,
They just got all their good guys taken.
yeah, I mean, the fact that they still rank 13th in total offense, I think is
Hmm.
the most surprising statistic to look at. Based just watching them on film and watching them in games last year, that's not where I would have expected them to.
Hmm.
But I think after watching them in the Cheez It Bowl against Florida State and watching how they battled Florida State and that that gave me a lot of hope heading into the season for Oklahoma. And like you said, it's year 2 in this system. I think their defense is going to be really improved under Brent Venables, who is a defensive minded head coach.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think it's. I don't think they're losing 49 nothing in the Red River rivalry, and that is going to be a game I'm excited to see. Is
Yeah.
how does Oklahoma not just respond to how down their season was last year? How do they respond to the disrespect that they had to endure from Texas, getting shut out 49 nothing in Dallas? Um, but yeah, like I said, I'm going to go with Baylor this season. They had 3 one-score losses last year. Blake Shapen just had he had a solid year in 2021. In 2022, they just kind of dumped everything on him. Whereas, before it was kind of a balanced offense. It really felt like they leaned heavier on the passing last year. Um, Shapen just wasn't the guy to undertake that. He's back this year. He has more experience, and I think if that's the way they decide to go, I think he'll be better. He can step up more. Um, but they really, really succeeded with this RVO offense, which is reliable, violent offense, and I love that terminology. Um, Richard Reese is returning at running back, and he played so well last year. So I think their offense is going to be much improved to where it was this past year. They get a brand new defensive coordinator. In the major stat lines, they average a 62.75 finish. So if they can get that to top 50, again, you're not just flipping those one score games, but there's maybe another game or two there that you can pull out. We might be looking at Baylor back in the Big 12 title game, which is where everybody thought they would be after winning it the year in 2021. Um, they get a lot of their most difficult games at home. They get Texas, Utah, and Texas Tech at home this season, and then their toughest road game in my eyes is at Kansas State. So even if they lose those 4 games, you're looking at an 8-4 season. And who knows with how crazy I feel like the Big 12 is going to be this year, might be good enough to get you a trip to Arlington or at least in the conversation there. So I think we're going to see a much improved Baylor team this year. I think we're going to take their head coach, Dave Arnada, off the hot seat. Who do you have as your most disappointing or the team that's going to take the biggest regression for this year?
Yeah. So, first off, I'm going to go with TCU. They have one great addition to the team in Breon Ramsey Brooks. Uh, the dude is 455 pounds and 6'5". He's two people. He's an offensive lineman. It's going to be very hard to get past him. Uh, but I just think, I mean, they lost 8 guys to the draft. Another 3 got picked up during free agents, like as free agents or whatever, you
Mhm.
know. I just think it's hard to go from they had a great season. I mean, they didn't show up in the last game of the season when it mattered, but they had a great season. But I mean, if you think about it, they've got 11 of their 22 starters gone.
Mhm.
I just think that's hard to replace, even with the transfer portal the way it is now. I think there's just too much to replace there. I mean, last year they lost what 2 wideouts, basically their defense, the linebacker, cornerbacker, or the cornerback, defensive end. They lost Max Dugan and their quarterback, their running back. Now I know that Dugan only got to start because of an injury,
Mhm.
and that guy will be back this season. But I just think that the rest of the team, I don't think that there being that quarterback that would have been the starter, possibly better than Dugan, could have possibly taken them farther. That one extra game, you don't know, obviously,
Right.
but I just think that it's too much lost talent for them to be able to replicate. And I think second in the nation, uh, and then if you go out and I don't know lose 7 games this season, it's definitely a regression for me.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I mean, they're not going to be fighting for a national championship in my eyes. I I don't want to say 7 losses. I'll have them at 4 or 5. I think is where I'm going to put them right now. Because I mean, on top of all that too, you lose your offensive coordinator Garrett
Hmm.
Riley. But seeing that this quarterback supposedly he beat out Max Duggan in the competition last year is the only thing kind of left giving me hope. And also just seeing how good of a coach Sonny Dykes is and the how he took SMU from a bottom of the American pile to the top, and then he came to TCU, and in one year he had it up there, and I get a lot of that was kind of lightning in the bottle, but I believe in his system. as a football coach myself, I like to read articles on these guys and how do they operate and all this other stuff. And I just really like the way that he commands his teams. And I think having a head coach like that is enough to keep them from, saying going from what 10-2, 13-2, all
Mhm.
down to like a 5-7 team, something like that. So I think there'll be 4 or 5 losses, but and again I think that'll be okay for them. But I agree with you. They're going to take a step back this year. Um, my team I'm going with is Oklahoma State. I People are for some reason in my eyes, or from what I've seen online, still very high on this team. I absolutely don't see it. I think we could possibly looking at the the beginning of the end. I think last season was the beginning of the end of Mike Gundy's tenure in Oklahoma State. I think he's shown that he's taken this team to as high as he can get them. They've been on the verge of the playoff a few times now. You think back, I think it was 2007. If they beat Iowa State, they're playing for a national championship game, and they lose that game. So they limped to a finish last year, winning just 2 of 8 games. They started 5-0, and then they limped to a 2-8 finish. So not really, high expectations off of that. Spencer Sanders and Braden Johnson are gone. Spencer Sanders transfers to Ole Miss. They also have a very difficult schedule. They're at Arizona State. They have South Alabama at home, and I talked about this when we did the Group of Five preview.
Mhm.
I really feel like that is a huge upset, possibility game. I think Alabama is that good, and Oklahoma State could be, that down. That's absolutely a game South Alabama can win. They have Kansas State at home. They have Kansas at home. They're at West Virginia. They have Oklahoma at home, and then at UCF and at Houston. So in my eyes, that's a really difficult schedule to get through, especially if the offense isn't gelling. With the loss of that offensive firepower, they get the running back returning. But watching them play the last few years, Spencer Sanders, if he was playing lights out, they were one of the best teams in college football. And then we saw in the Big-12 championship game against Baylor in 2021, he threw four interceptions, and that was their undoing because if he was hot or cold. And now with him just gone, it'll be really nice to see how this team functions. Like I said, I don't even have them making a bowl game in my eyes this year. So that's why I have Oklahoma State as the most declined, most regressed team in the Big 12.
You
So
start
now,
us off. You start us off first. I want to hear yours.
okay,
Big 12 winner for this season. Last season, we talked about it. It was Kansas State. They beat out TCU.
hmm
TCU ends up getting picked to go to the college football playoffs. They make it to the finals, blown out of the water.
I need
Who do
to.
you think wins the Big Twin
I
or the
want to
Big
go
12 this
back
year?
and figure out first of all who we picked last year, and I should have done this before and seen how far off we were. Um, but for this year, my Big 12 winner, I'm going to go with Texas Tech. They're returning all 11 starters on offense. They ranked 22nd in total offense last year. They need to make major improvements on defense. They have strong defensive line returners. They got a few transfers coming in. They get Tim DeRuiter. He's going to be in his second year calling the plays on the defense. Um, as an Oregon fan, I am scared to travel to Lubbock in week 2 and play them. I think that is a huge game, and Texas Tech made a statement early in the season last year against Texas. They got that huge overtime win after coming back. Um, and I'll let you talk about Texas here in a minute. But um, I, I just feel Coach McGuire did amazing things with this program in year 1. I'm expecting even another step up here in year 2. Um, and then they could really position themselves to be the class of the Big 12 with Texas and Oklahoma leaving. Like I
Mm-hmm.
said, the conference is going to need a team to step up and be their corner post. They're week in week out. Or year in year out, I should say. This is our strongest team, like Oklahoma has been for so many years. Was Texas? They kind of fell off a little bit. Then Oklahoma took up that mantle. They made the playoffs and all that other stuff. Who's going to be that next team? It doesn't look like it's going to be TCU, but it might. And so I feel like this season, and maybe this is even the storyline more so than the American teams joining or Texas and Oklahoma leaving. And it kind of piggies back, I guess, off of Texas and Oklahoma leaving is who's going to take out that mantle? Who's going to be the corner post of this conference? Is it Utah coming in next year, or Colorado, a team like that, or is it going to be a blue blood Big 12 school like Texas Tech to kind of carry the banner for this conference? Um, but I'm just really excited about this team, and again, Coach McGuire, and I think they're poised to do big things this year, especially watching them. I know Ole Miss had a bunch of guys sitting out, and
Mhm.
watching the game, I don't think Ole Miss cared. But just watching them completely dismantle Ole Miss in that bowl game, that's why I'm going with them.
Yeah, definitely. Like you had said, a tough team that can come out of nowhere. Texas felt that last year. They just didn't come out in the second half. Texas Tech came back. Big win. I don't think you have to look back at who I picked last year. I think it's very well
Yeah, I
known.
know who you picked.
I'm going with the
You
same
picked North
team.
Texas. You picked if it
Yeah,
had Texas in the name, you picked
that's
them.
right. I was gonna say I'm sticking with the same state. This state is gonna win the Big 12 this year. Texas. uh, Sark. I'm not even calling him Sarkisian anymore. I'm going with Sark because he's that cool. He said that basically every away game this year, he has told the team that going in, they're going to be the most hated people. It's not just because they're Texas; it's because they're abandoning the conference that has been home for so many years.
Mhm.
I'd assumed that Oklahoma is probably under the same understanding that they're going to catch a lot of that also. Um, I just think that if there's any other reason to hate some of these bigger teams that have a lot of money, might not be that good. Texas hasn't been like great, the last couple of years, but there's so much money funneled into the school that there's a bit of jealousy there with other schools. I think it just comes with the territory. Uh, but basically, he's got the team wearing "Embrace the Hate" T-shirts. That's their motto for the season. Arch Manning is sitting on the bench, and they just sold a player card for him for $103,000. It's an NIL deal. They asked Coach Sark if he was the one that bought it, and he bold-faced lied to the media and said he doesn't have that kind of money to be able to buy a card like that. Now, we understand you didn't buy it. His family probably bought the card and donated the money, whatever, like, because they're not even allowing him to do NIL deals right now. But the fact that he said he doesn't have the money, I mean, come on.
Yeah, no. The reason, and it's not just because of the tattoo,
Mhm,
but the reason I went against Texas, uh, I I just worry how much of an impact losing Bijan Robinson is going to be on
mhm.
that team. He got them through a lot of difficult stretches last year. Quinn Ewers was very hot and cold, and he got injured a few times. But no matter what, they could look to Bijan Robinson, hand the ball off to him, and aside from the Texas Tech game where he essentially fumbled that game away, he's been the cornerstone of that team for the last 2 years at least. Um, I've made my concerns known about Sark in the past. I'm not
You don't
saying
get
he's
to
a
talk.
bad
You
coach.
don't get to call him that. You guys aren't close like
I've
that.
I've made my concerns about Sarkisian known in the past. I'm not saying he's a bad coach. Just don't think he's good enough to get a team to that level. I think his ability and maybe with all these recruits and transfers coming in, maybe it's enough to get him over that hump. Maybe he's into a playoff spot or winning conference titles. But as a coach himself, if you gave him and a more if you gave every coach in Division One college football the same exact roster, and how could you? I feel like you would finish middle of the pack. I really feel like, and I'm not even talking about recruiting. I'm talking about
Mhm.
just straight up coaching. I feel like his plateau is kind of that 3 loss season, 9-3, 10-2. If they catch a couple breaks, if they can stay healthy. And so those are my reservations about Texas as itself. I think it's good for college football when Texas is one of the best teams in the country. They bring a lot of natural, like some people. It's very divisive. People hate it,
It's
love them or
it's
hate it.
very similar to Alabama when
Absolutely,
Alabama's running the ship. Yeah.
yeah. And we kind of saw that passing of the torch
Mhm,
when Alabama beat Texas in the national title and really kickstarted their dynasty. And ever
mhm.
since then, Texas has struggled. But
Speaking of that, those two teams play week 2 this year
they do,
in Tuscaloosa.
yeah. And that was kind of another reason is I last year I feel like was so uplifting for Texas
Mhm,
to play Alabama at home, played them so well. They should have won that game going back and watching that game, the refs handed it to Alabama, and I will argue that, and I know if an Alabama fan watches this, they're going to argue with me that roughing the passer and yeah, I think it was I can't remember if it was targeting, maybe it was roughing the passer with targeting or
And Bryce
that
Young, yeah.
they called when it was a safety was game changing, and that cost Texas the win, and Texas absolutely deserved to win that game. Um, but there's a lot of unknowns, and we're going to talk about Alabama here in 2 weeks. There's a lot of unknowns around that team. Um, but I if Alabama can be Alabama, if they can play well, it's going to be difficult for Texas to go into Bryant Denny. That's going to be a night game. I, I'm not saying they're going to get blown out, but it could be a disheartening loss after how close they were last season.
They're
Um,
7-point
and,
underdogs right now,
yeah, and
which I think is generous for Texas.
I would agree. Um, but I mean, if they end up losing by 2 or 3 scores, that does that put a damper on their season moving forward? Does it take them maybe a week or two to kind of regain their composure? And I believe they have, for lack of a better term, here's their schedule. They play Wyoming the next week, so
Correct.
you hope if they can make it out of Alabama healthy,
If ever there was a season for them to do good, them their three top teams, for me personally looking at it,
Mhm,
is Alabama week 2. Then they get 3 weeks to kind of prepare for Oklahoma at
mhm.
home in the Red River rivalry. And then the last game of the season is against who you believe is going to be the biggest team or the best team in the Big 12 is against Texas Tech at home.
Don't look. I don't want to make it clear
I'm
too.
not
I'm
trying
not.
to look past. I'm saying those
No,
are the top teams.
I would put Kansas State in that conversation. I
Oh, for
really
sure.
feel like with Kansas State is what they're returning. Adrian Martinez was a good quarterback, but he was also injury prone. I think, and I need to go find his name because I don't want to.
But while you're looking for that,
Will
even
Will
adding
Howard.
Kansas
Yeah,
State, there's still a 2-week buffer between every big school. Now, you can't overlook all these teams. That's what Penn State does every year. They end up losing to
right.
Illinois or whoever the idea is. You can't
Mhm,
overlook any team. But in terms of like those four teams,
mhm.
to be able to have a schedule where you're going to play 3 of the 4 teams at home
Right.
and there's a 2-week buffer in between all of those games is just crazy.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. If there's a year to do it, it's going to be this year. But like I said, if say Alabama wins by 3 scores, it's 28
Mhm.
to 7. It's going to be high scoring than that. But if it's 28 to 7, is that disheartening enough that even if they say they blow out Wyoming the next week, that they're doubting themselves, playing Baylor, and who again,
Mhm.
it's going to be a very difficult. Every game in the Big 12 is going to be a fight this year.
Yeah, and
Is
sorry,
I'm
just to
just saying,
kind of
like, is that enough? Is that Alabama game enough to kind of dampen them for a few weeks before they finally like, listen, we are a good football team and we know what we can do. Um, that's those are my concerns about Texas and why I had enough reservations about them to be like, I feel like I'm going to give the edge of Texas Tech, and that's why.
yeah, I think that the Bijan Robinson comment that you had said, I mean, he was their safety net last year.
Mhm,
Quinn throws an interception next drive. All we're doing is handing the ball off. Okay, now Quinn can throw the ball. Let's uh let's let him throw the ball a couple of times while mixing in a couple of run plays with Bijan Robinson.
mhm,
Okay, he threw another pick. Okay, we're running the ball this next drive. Like that was their safety net. Um, I think that it's going to really rely on their defense, kind of like it did last year. The fact that it was 20-20 against Alabama, who is just a powerhouse when it comes to offense. I mean, Alabama could be playing anyone, and they go in at halftime and they come out, and it's like they're playing a JV team all of a sudden. They've
mhm.
somehow figured out every weakness that this team had in the first half that they weren't able to capitalize on. So I think, like you said, that being week 2 is going to be a big tell for how Texas performs the rest of the season because I do see them going into a slump if they go out and get blown out by 3-4 scores.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that'll do it for our Big 12 season preview for this year. We thank you guys so much for joining us and us being long winded about conference realignment and all that fun stuff. We are excited about it, though. Again, being an Oregon fan, talking football with a Penn State fan, I really hope. I texted you guys. I texted my brother-in-laws, and I texted my father-in-law. I really hope that first year they play either Nebraska, Penn State, or Michigan, and not because I want
Mm-hmm.
to see how we are against it, just because I really want to either go to a game with one of you guys. Penn State whiteout would be dope, but that would be so cool, such an awesome first years, for us to get to go to a game together. We thought the only time it would ever happen is the Rose Bowl or a playoff or something like that, and
We were hoping for it last season.
yeah,
Oregon ended up losing that game, and that's where we thought they were going to be together. Yeah.
yep. Yeah, so just very exciting. But there still is, Pac-12 is leaving. It's never fun when you have a historic conference like that leaving, and all the things that come with it. We're still going to preview them in 2 weeks. It's still a huge season for them. It's
It'll be
going
a
to be a lot of
quick
fun.
episode.
Or no, I'm sorry, it's next week. Next week we're previewing them. But yeah, so
Yeah.
it's gonna be a lot of fun though, and I'm sure there's gonna be a ton of news that comes out between this week
Mhm.
and next week, as it seems to be the trend here lately. But again, thank you guys so much for checking us out. I think right now we're up to 16 views on our last video. I understand that's not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but to us that means so much. So thank you guys. We started making TikToks again, so make sure you guys head over there to our TikTok and check us out, our Twitter and Instagram as well. We appreciate your guys' support. We'll see you next week for the Pac-12 preview.
Sir.